Hello. Today we're going to talk about the concept of justice. Now, technically, it's not part of a moral theory or a normative moral theory, but it is a crucial and integral aspect and concept within the context of ethical theory, and particularly social and applied ethics, as in the case of medical or healthcare ethics. What is justice? Defining justice is a very difficult concept, and it goes uh, back to antiquity, where ancient traditions from many different cultures had deified and turned the concept of justice into a god. So, in the ancient Greek and Roman tradition, uh, Eustia was the goddess of justice, and that's still an issue represented symbolically today when we think of our statues of justice. Justice has certain uh, uh, symbolic or signs that refer to underlying concepts that we take to be part of and essential ingredients to justice. So, for example, as you imagine a concept or a statue of justice, it's always a goddess or a woman, right? Referring to perhaps a deeper matriarchal aspect, or maybe an essentialist notion that women are more just than men. I'll leave that up to your own interpretation. Justice almost always carries a scale, which is to imply that justice is going to be balanced, well balanced indeed. Justice is almost always carrying some kind of weapon, a scepter, a sword, or some kind of weapon to suggest that there's always going to be punishment for breaking justice, or that the goddess justice alternatively will defend justice, right? And justice is almost always portrayed as having a blindfold. And this, of course, is that an essential ingredient to any notion of justice is its impartiality, that it's fair, that it treats everyone in similar cases in like manner. And finally, you often find justice partially clad or nude. And this refers, one can imagine, to the notion of justice needs to be transparent. It has to be open to public purview. We take all these concepts together, we see that justice as a formal philosophical concept is essentially a concept where we're thinking about fairness. And the great American philosopher John Rawls, in his book Justice, conceived justice as a kind of fairness. Well, what do we mean by fair? Fair, I take it, is something where we recognize that persons in similar circumstances are going to be treated equally, and they're going to have equal access to the same goods and services. Now, of course, justice is far more difficult to pin down. There are variations of justice, as we'll see. There are social justice, there are legal justices, there are concepts within justice that need to be further delineated. For example, when we talk about justice, are we talking about the allocations of goods and services, right? Are we talking about the punitive nature of justice? Or are we talking about treating people in a different way depending upon what they merit? Okay, so meritocratic notions of justice. And all these may um, um, require us to think differently in our application of justice. Within the context of healthcare, justice is one of the most crucial and hot button issues of our day. Of course, you may see signs and bumper stickers and placards and internet memes talking about uh, healthcare as a justice or healthcare as a right. And these refer to the notion that anyone living within a particular society should have equal access to medical treatment, that it seems just and fair. Now, uh, within this, we're going to see there's a whole range of possible topics and subtopics that we could focus on in this short presentation. We're not going to do that. We're just going to mention a few. We could, of course, look at vulnerable populations, populations that don't have access to the kind of quality health care that others have in our society. So, for example, we could look at um, access to healthcare in minority communities. Why is it that Native Americans and people of color have less access to healthcare, and you see more uh, worse outcomes in terms of their health. Women, children, the disabled, the elderly, these are all ways that we can areas we could focus on injustice. Defining justice is key, though, and you'll see that there are um, a variety of interpretations as you do the reading to look through justice. But I'm going to offer a short, tentative definition that we treat justice as a kind of fairness. Um, and then within whatever context we're going to be looking at. And closely related to the concept of justice is the notion of right. I mentioned that in terms of you may see people advocating and saying that healthcare is a right. Within the concept of social justice, we often do talk about having a right to something. What is a right? Well, a right is also a very complex topic in political and social philosophy. What we tend to understand is that a right is a claim to some good or service, right? So to say that I have a right to healthcare is to say that I should have access to the goods and services that we refer to in terms of medicine and healthcare. Now, immediately you realize that with every right there comes a duty, and this duty is going to impose a burden on someone to offer me those goods and services. So if I say I have a right, say, to proper dental care, then of course it means there has to be dental hygienists and dentists and oral surgeons in order to provide that. And then of course the question becomes who pays, how much, and so forth. And those become the burning economic questions of our time. So within the context of justice and right and duty, we often talk about economic justice. How much do things cost? Who pays for it? How do I afford it? Should I have access to the kind of care, or should that be something that only the wealthy can afford, a kind of boutique health care, right? Or could it be a kind of universal health care? Many of the debates in justice today around healthcare really do constellate and depend upon how and who we pay for these kinds of accesses. And so we talk about single payer, universal health care as a variant of the state or some larger body or collectivity paying for health care, right? Now, if we think about right not only implies a duty, but there are different kinds of rights. We have positive rights and we have negative rights. A positive right is a right to do something. So I might say that I have a right to speak my mind. That would be guaranteed in the United States Constitution up to a point in the Second Amendment, right? Um, Excuse me, the First Amendment. And but when we think about uh, the Bill of Rights and those amendments, like the right to free speech that the First Amendment guarantees us, we actually aren't looking at a positive right. It's a negative right. That's a second kind of right. A negative right is a right from some imposition, right? And so if you read the rights in the Bill of Rights, you'll see that they are freedom from things. All right. So we have negative and positive rights. So you have to figure out what you're talking about when you say healthcare is a right. Is it freedom? Is it a freedom from something or is it freedom to something? In most instances, it's going to be a freedom to something, freedom to a kind of quality of care, etc. And of course, duty and obligations follow from those. Someone may have an obligation. We do have a lot of moral conflicts that occur here. So, for example, within the context of end of life care, my right to end my life might impose a duty on someone to assist me. And of course, if that person is, for whatever, either morally or religiously opposed to suicide, or euthanasia, then it becomes a burden that they may not want to bear, right? So you have a moral conflict. So we have this concept of justice as fairness and a set of allied terms like rights, duties, and obligations. We also have, very importantly, within the context of justice, questions of equality and equity. When we look at equality and equity, uh, when we're saying something is equal, we're saying that someone has should be treated in the exact same manner, right? Um, that I have the same rights, equal rights. deeper still, and perhaps the more burning and very important social justice question within healthcare is the concept of equity. And equity means that a person gets what they need rather than treating people equally, right? So, equality, everyone gets the same. Equity, people get what their particular circumstances require so that they can be equal. You see the difference, I hope. Right. Okay, so that's our our short survey on concepts of justice and these other related terms. And we'll be looking at many of the different areas: economic justice, social justice, the growing inequalities, and I think as we during the COVID era, the shortcomings and failures and inequities of our healthcare system have been brought forward, and we see how bad they really are. And of course, this should be a stimulus and a catalyst to address those problems so that we do have a just healthcare system. See you later.